Hi, welcome to Journey into Parenting. So this is a space which is dedicated to helping you prepare for the amazing adventure of parenthood. Today I've got Katie Angotti here to do an interview, and she's a nutritionalist who specialises in working with mums and babies. So Katie, I'd love to ask you where your passion for nutrition came from. Like, what was your kind of journey into that?
Yeah, sure. So originally I got into nutrition from school. So I did food tech, as lots of people do, for GCSEs and A levels, and it was around the time that Jamie Oliver did his school meals program, if you
Oh,
remember that.
cool. Yeah.
Like went into the school kitchens and showed that there was not enough money being spent on school meals, and the quality of food in school
Hmm.
was poor. And it's
Hmm.
kind of spiraled from there, really. So I got really into that, and I decided to go study nutrition at university. So I did my degree in public health nutrition up in Sheffield. And then it was whilst I was there, I did some volunteering for a local college, and they ran a childcare course.
Yeah.
Went and worked with the students who were studying childcare and looked at how we could help them support the kids in the nursery with nutrition.
Mm.
Um, so that was where I started getting really interested in children's nutrition, because it was just really fun. It was a fun area to work in.
Mm.
People are quite interested when it comes to children's nutrition, generally want to do the best for their children, whereas they might not choose to do that as adults. So you see a lot of engagement and people get quite into it. Um,
Yeah. I
yeah.
guess the habits you form when you're a child are quite important, aren't they, around
Oh,
foods?
yeah. It's such
Mm.
a good time to try and start to embed good habits. And we all have memories of food from our childhood that you can think about now, whether it's a food that you really love or you really hate. You really, really can feel and remember what it was like to be forced to eat a food that you didn't like as a child, or, have that really positive memory of a lovely cooked meal. Uh,
Yeah. Do you
yeah.
feel like does it have lots of benefits if you're eating the right food? Like I'm imagining that it impacts your mood and concentration and all of those kind of things.
Yeah, absolutely. There's
How?
lots of evidence to say, particularly around concentration in children,
Mhm.
if they're eating well, and really if they're hydrated, that can really affect their concentration at school, which obviously then
Mhm.
in turn affects how well they do at school and their education going forwards. But also as adults, staying well hydrated can really keep your energy levels up, because you know when you start to lag, if you've not eaten in a while, or you've not eaten regularly, or you've not drank regularly, it does have a big impact. um, there are little nuances of different foods that can make a huge difference, or not much. It depends on the individual. I think you find quite a lot you can put
Okay.
onto it, but generally, if you're eating regularly, that's the main thing for maintaining good energy and good mood.
I think it's something that's really improved in schools because I can remember being really thirsty all the time when I was at school. And I think it was partly because we weren't allowed to have water with us, and the only kind of like place to get water was like in the toilet, and I found it a bit gross, and so I just didn't drink. And then, it probably had like a really big effect on me.
That's a huge thing now. They're really
Yeah.
encouraged. Everyone's got their own water bottle, and they're really encouraged to drink. There's a huge change in understanding there, uh,
Hmm.
how important it is not just to have water, but to give children free access to water so that they can choose to have it when they want and respond to their own thirst and their own hunger. So they're listening to those cues that
Yeah.
therefore I should drink.
Yeah, that's interesting because my son goes to a democratic school, which is very child led, and they're allowed to just eat whenever they want to, and sort of instinctively, I feel like that helps them to have a kind of a healthy relationship with food. Would you agree with that, or what would your viewpoint be?
If there's something called the division of responsibility, which I don't know if
Okay.
you've heard of, but it was introduced by a dietitian in America called Ellen Slatter, and she introduced this idea that we're all born innately understanding when we're hungry and when we're full, um,
Hmm.
and as parents, our job is to help children to preserve that, to really understand that, and to know their own
Hmm.
hunger, and therefore respond to it. And there's caveats to that, in that you can't always allow children free reign of everything that's
Hmm.
available, but by encouraging them to just pay attention to when they're hungry and allowing them to eat until they're full, or not eat, if the case may be, because children aren't hungry all the time, that actually we're really helping them to understand that, and they'll carry through into adulthood. And we know that lots of adults have a terrible relationship with food in terms of restricting what they eat and then binging, because they just are really disconnected with their own hunger and fullness and their own bodies. And so if
Yeah.
we can try and do that with children, like like the school is doing, then that's a really good way of keeping that going for longer.
Yeah, amazing. So to kind of go right back to the beginning, so I'd love to hear some more about pregnancy nutrition, and if you've got any kind of specific advice, or if again it's quite an individual matter.
It is. So I studied nutrition, and I used to advise pregnant women when I worked in the NHS, and then I was pregnant myself. So I got to try and experience all of the theory in practice. And I think one of the things that I really have taken from both experiences is that it's very important to listen to your body with nutrition in pregnancy, because you can be really sick, you can be really nauseous, you can go through periods of not wanting to eat at all and then being very, very hungry. And being really in tune with your body just helps. So I was very sick for the first 20 weeks of pregnancy.
I was too. It was terrible. I remember people saying, "Oh, it's all right, you'll feel better in 5 weeks," and I'm like, 5 weeks?
It's horrible, and trying to eat
Yeah.
and is just the worst, isn't it? You really
Yeah,
can't
definitely.
force
Yeah.
yourself to feel that sick.
Yeah,
And
it's awful.
I think sometimes we can put too much pressure on pregnant women to eat well, and it makes you feel really guilty then if you are struggling to eat, but you've got this pressure that I've got to eat well because I'm growing a baby, and if I don't eat all these foods then baby's going to miss out on X, Y and Z. And actually, just in the first few weeks, stepping back and thinking, do you know what, it's more important that I'm calm, that I'm not stressed, that I don't feel guilty about what
Mm.
I am or aren't eating.
Yeah.
So there are things that would be ideal, but I
Yeah.
do think, having come out of pregnancy, that actually we can put too much pressure on women to eat the right things.
Mm.
Having said that, supplements are quite important in pregnancy, particularly if you are struggling to eat, because then at least you've kind of caught up all of those nutrients.
Yeah. Which supplements would you recommend?
The vitamin D is like one of the main ones,
Okay.
and folic acid.
Hmm.
Generally speaking, folic acid we don't typically get enough, and you have an increased need in pregnancy. So it can be hard if you're not eating those foods anyway, and then you can't eat because you're sick, and your body
Mm.
requires sort of 2-3 times more than it would do normally.
Yeah.
Supplements are the best way to get that in your diet. And vitamin D is so dependent on the weather and you getting outside, because you
Mm.
get it in many foods that if you're pregnant over winter, you have to supplement. There's not really a good way to get it safely from food. Um,
Yeah. Would you say anyway, whether you're pregnant or not, it's good to have vitamin D in the winter?
I take
Mm.
a vitamin D supplement all year round,
Mm.
because even if it is sunny, I've got really fair skin. I don't actually go out in the sun that much,
Yeah.
even
Same.
because I burn too quickly. So actually all year round for a lot of people, and especially now we're in lockdown, people aren't out and about as they might have been before.
Mm. Yeah.
But energy foods are really good when you're pregnant, just for maintaining that energy level. So some people I've heard get really worried that all they can manage is toast or something dry like that when they're pregnant, particularly in the early days. But most flour in the UK is fortified, so actually having some toast is not the worst thing in the world that you
Okay.
can do.
Yeah.
It's got lots of B vitamins in it. It's a good source of energy. If you can manage to put something like, I don't know, peanut butter or something like that on it, it's not a terrible food to be consuming whilst you're pregnant, if that's all you can manage.
Yeah.
Um, in an ideal world, you'd have lots of fruits and vegetables. You'd have lots of grains and fishes or other sorts of sources of omega-3, because that's really good for brain development for the baby.
Mm.
Um, you would try and have lots of water and avoid caffeine and avoid alcohol. Again, so I didn't realize quite how thirsty that I would get whilst I was pregnant, quite how much extra water I'd need to be having, just because of the amount of extra fluid that you're building around the baby. And then also how much iron I might have needed. I'm vegetarian.
Yeah.
generally my iron levels are pretty good, and they're obviously monitored throughout pregnancy, but they do start to take a dip if you're not eating regularly and you're not eating the right foods. So being
Okay.
mindful
Yeah.
of iron rich foods is key as well.
Yeah, and is that lots of leafy green vegetables, that kind of thing?
Yeah, leafy greens are good, but it's quite hard to absorb the iron from leafy green veg.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah, so you have two different types of iron. The iron that you find in meat and fish is called
Mm.
heme iron, so it comes from blood, and it's easier for your body to absorb because it's in the same format in
Hmm.
the animal as you need it, so it's quite easy
Okay.
to absorb. Whereas in a plant, it's in a slightly different format, and there are other nutrients in the plant that make it harder for you to absorb it. So
Hmm.
to get all the iron that's in green vegetables, you need to make sure you're having lots of vitamin C rich foods and just a variety of other foods around it to
Okay.
enough. So actually things like pulses, lentils, beans are a good source of iron. Dried fruit,
Oh,
like
right.
dried apricots, are a really good source of iron.
Hmm.
And actually fortified breakfast cereals are one of the best sources of iron that we have in the UK, particularly if you're on a very limited diet.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. I would worry about the amount of sugar in a lot of cereals.
Yeah, it's definitely one to watch. There are a variety of cereals that have lots of sugar in, but there
Yeah.
are a few that come under the sort of low sugar
Okay.
categories. Definitely, if you're really struggling for food during pregnancy and you are having that really nauseous time,
Yeah.
is potentially a good option to at least
Okay.
do a little
Yeah.
bit of nutrition.
Yeah. That's
Wholemeal
good to
bread
know.
is a good one as well. That contains a reasonable amount of iron in wholemeal bread.
Hmm.
There are other ways around it. You don't have to rely on meat all the
Yeah.
time.
Okay. Yeah, that's good to know. And does your need for protein increase during pregnancy?
Ever so slightly. I actually did
Okay.
an Instagram post on this the other day. So it increases by about 5 or 6 grams overall, and it's primarily
Okay.
in the last trimester. Um,
Okay.
but the general population eat more protein than we need anyway. So
Right. Okay.
actually, no, not really. You don't really need to change anything.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting.
Unless you have a diet that's particularly low in protein in the first place, and perhaps, I don't know, maybe you've turned vegan recently and haven't quite sussed out where protein is coming from in your diet, then you might
Hmm.
consider it. Um,
Yeah. Is there a rule of thumb around like how many extra calories you need during each trimester?
Again, not really until the very last trimester.
Hmm.
It's only 200 calories a day, and that's in the third trimester.
Okay. Interesting.
If you think about kinds of foods, it's like a slice of toast with some spread on it,
Hmm.
tea cake or something like that. It's quite a small snack to add in.
Okay. Yeah, so you don't need to go crazy and kind of
No, you
eat for
don't.
two.
But having said that, your appetite will vary throughout pregnancy, and I think it used to be the message to eat for two, and then there was the message more recently, which is don't eat for two, don't baby.
Yeah.
And I think you have to sit somewhere in the middle because
Hmm.
you know your own appetite. I think in pregnancy it's a really good opportunity to get to know what's going on in
Mm.
your body, because you can start to feel changes and you're already spending time getting to know baby and what the baby's movements are like. So I think it's
Mm.
a really good time for self-reflection and getting
Yeah.
to understand when you really are hungry. And if you are hungry, eat. It's
Hmm.
better to eat and keep your energy maintained than to feel like you can't because
Yeah.
you're worried about gaining weight or eating too much. Uh,
Yeah.
and
And
also,
there's so much pressure anyway, I think, as women for us to kind of look a certain way or, be a little bit hungry all the time, which actually, yeah, it's not
and
a
it
great
just
thing to.
builds it up in your mind as well. And the more hungry you are and the more you restrict food, the more you think about it, and then the more
Mm.
likely you are to binge later on.
Yeah.
Uh, so it's just not a great thing to be doing. I think it's much better to eat a little bit if you're feeling
Hmm.
hungry than to stress about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I was a chronic dieter throughout my 20s. And then now that I'm in my 30s, I don't really worry about it anymore. Like I think, like you say, the more that you tune into your body and you know what you need, it just becomes a thing that I don't need to really think
Exactly.
about so much.
Dieting doesn't work. We know there's so much evidence that dieting does not work.
Hmm.
It's just not a good way to live your life. It's ineffective. It can be more damaging than to not trying diets in the first place, as your
Yeah.
body starts to try, and your body's natural reaction is to fight
Hmm.
start to restrict food because it doesn't want to
Okay.
starve.
Yeah. So it's quite a survival instinct actually that kicks in.
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I think what when you were talking about using pregnancy as an opportunity to become more in tune with your body, I think that's something that can really help in bonding with your baby as well. But like that, the more you're listening to yourself, the more able you are to kind of really tune into and listen to your baby, and sort of even start to kind of um, match their breath and that kind of thing, and really kind of tune into their rhythms. It's
Yeah,
a really great
yeah.
thing.
I mean, I did the whole like hypnobirthing and everything, and I just found
Mm-hmm.
that time to focus on baby was so helpful. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and just, yeah, it gives you a real sense of actually starting to bond with them.
Yeah, and there's evidence now that like actually, um, if you kind of talk to your baby as if it was an imaginary friend, that actually makes it easier for you to bond with them after they've been born. So even if it feels a bit silly, it's actually something really incredibly useful.
Yeah. Yeah, because you do see people worrying, don't you, when they're born that they don't know how to talk to babies, or especially if it's
Mm-hmm.
the first time you've never been around a baby before. How do you talk to this thing that doesn't quite interact back?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and actually, it's great to just. I mean, it's fine to not know what you're doing and to reach out for support, but also I think it's great just to kind of chatter away to them, just to kind of narrate what's going on around you, and even if they don't understand, it's really comforting for them to just hear your voice, and then ultimately, I think it really helps with their brain development as well.
It's all seeping in, isn't it? All seeping into them.
Yeah, it's amazing. I wanted to ask also about nutrition for breastfeeding, because I'd heard that you're meant to have 500 extra calories when you're breastfeeding, but again, I'm not sure if that's true, or
You have a slight increase in energy requirements, and the 500
okay.
extra calories thing comes in because it's thought that on average, if you're exclusively breastfeeding, that you'll burn 500 calories
Mhm.
a day through doing that. Um, but again, it's about being in tune to how much extra energy you need. There aren't huge nutritional changes that you require during breastfeeding, because your body's
Mhm.
clever. It figures it out and it
Mhm.
produces milk regardless. The only thing that really is influenced by what you eat when you're breastfeeding is the different fat profile of breast milk, so the different levels of omega 3
Mhm.
and 6s. But broadly speaking, if you're having quite a varied diet, your body will produce the absolute best milk that it can do for baby.
Mhm.
It's just that clever. It's amazing at what it can do.
Yeah,
uh,
yeah,
but I
it's
think
amazing.
more that actually it's quite exhausting breastfeeding,
Totally. Yeah.
especially when you're in the early stages and you're feeding like every hour to 2 hours and you're up constantly through the night. Feeding's more important to maintain your energy, again, just because you start to get really quite anxious or angry or headachy, or those kinds of real hunger signs that your body's fighting back. And it's that
Mhm.
you want to avoid, because I think if you're sleep deprived and you're hungry and you're trying to breastfeed and it's perhaps more of a challenge than you expected, all of those things just start to add up. And if you can just alleviate the hunger bit, so at least you haven't got the hanger,
Yeah, and I
that
think
really.
like using food as a way of nurturing yourself when you're breastfeeding as well, because actually, you're giving a lot. It takes a lot of energy to breastfeed, so to sort of use food as an opportunity to make yourself feel cared for.
Yeah, and I think it's like you say, it's feeling good about what you're eating. And I think
Mm,
there's certain foods that are suggested might help with breast milk production and increasing it. But if doing that makes you feel more stressed and anxious, then I wouldn't necessarily do it. I think you have to treat it as a time to nourish yourself. And if those
yeah.
foods are, eating a big bowl of porridge, that's something that's really nourishing to you, or eating, beans on toast, then that's great. It doesn't have to be some green smoothie with oats and all this kind of stuff. If
Mm,
that's what works for you, then that's good as well. But I think, again, you can just put too much pressure on yourself to um,
mm,
eat the perfect breastfeeding diet, when really it, you know, it doesn't exist. Everybody's very different.
Mm.
And it's better to find something that feels nourishing to you.
Yeah, great. And it feels like, you know, a similar thing again, that it's sort of the most important thing is to listen to our own bodies and tune into your baby, and actually
Yeah.
come back to a place where we're trusting our
Yeah.
intuition.
And some days that'll be, you know, you want to just demolish a big bowl of vegetables. That's really good. And other days you just want to eat a piece of cake. And that's
Yeah.
also, they've both got their place. There's no right or
Mhm.
wrong, and there's no good or bad in foods.
Yeah.
It's just how it makes you feel at that time, and trusting
Mm.
your body will kind of
Yeah.
do the right thing for you.
Cool. Um, I also wanted to ask, I think it's a problem that a lot of people have with toddlers, that they pick like one or two foods and they only want to eat that. What's going on for your toddler when they're doing that?
It's so normal. It is so normal.
Okay.
So when toddlers hit around 2-ish,
Mhm.
they're walking, they're exploring, they're picking more stuff up. They hit what we call neophobia, which is just a fear of new things.
Oh, okay.
They start to
Yeah.
like distrust even stuff that they've liked previously. So partly they're trying to exert their independence, and you know, they can say no, they can start to do some controlling of their own, but also they're just genuinely a little bit more cautious. And it's
Mhm.
an evolutionary thing, really. You know, they're
Mhm.
starting to explore, they move further away from you, they're not sure what's right or safe to eat or to play with, and so they might start to just hate the foods that they hated previously. And
Mhm.
not really anything you did wrong, and it's not generally anything you can avoid, so it will vary in how severe it is. Some toddlers
Mhm.
are very, very mild, and others, they might, you know, really start to reject a lot of foods. um,
Mhm.
but I think people should be reassured that it is very normal.
That's really fascinating, because I guess a lot of us as parents kind of panic and start trying to force them to eat different types of food, and actually that seems like that's the exact wrong thing to do, because you know it's so much about their fundamental sense of safety in the world, and actually just to reassure them and help them to feel really safe.
Definitely. The worst thing you can do is to then take that food away and never bring it back again, because actually what
Okay.
confirms that, oh yeah, that
Mm.
food wasn't good, so now it's gone. um they might, you know, you should still serve it, still offer it, still have it on the
Mm.
table, still eat it yourself. um
Yeah.
they might not try it again for, you know, weeks, months.
Yeah.
If they see that you're eating it and they see that it's safe, then they
Mm.
come around to it eventually.
Yeah, so would your advice be to sort of to offer them the food that does feel safe, but also give them the opportunity to try things that are slightly less familiar, and then you know eventually they'll kind of
It's
come
a
around
good
to it.
balance, and you can have foods that they like, and then foods that they're maybe trying, and
Mm.
try and have a bit of a balance of both. You don't want a plate full of foods that they've never seen before. That's quite
Mm.
intimidating. um, and likewise, you don't want to solely stick to the foods that they do love, because then when that neophobia does kick in and those
Mm.
foods start to dwindle down and down and down, you're left with a very small amount of foods that they eat, and that's where problems can occur. So having the balance of foods that we know and like, and foods that we want to try is a
Yeah.
good way to do it. And giving
Mhm.
them the option to sort of pick and choose often can help when they're starting to be independent and want
Mm.
some control. Giving them the choice of, shall we have peas or sweet corn, and then they get to choose. They
Mhm.
feel happy because they've had a little bit of control over what's going on their plate, and you're
Yeah.
happy because you know they've eaten one of the vegetables that you wanted them to.
Yeah.
Good
And I
balance.
think probably it's good to sort of to not overwhelm them with too many choices, but just kind of allow them to choose within a kind of limited
Yeah,
range.
definitely. I definitely recommend the division of responsibility is a really good tool to look at, particularly around toddler age, because it
Okay.
talks about your role as a parent versus your child's role in the
Mhm.
feeding, eating experience. And
Mhm.
your role as a parent is just to provide the food, and
Yeah.
provide it in a safe space and location. So choose what time they're eating it. So you
Mhm.
set out your meal structure for the day, and that, you know, the fridge isn't necessarily open all the time. Um, and you provide, you know, a table, a chair, wherever the eating environment is. But actually, it's your child's responsibility to eat the food and choose how
Mm.
much they eat and if they want to eat. And I
Yeah.
think take that pressure off you as a parent, that it's not your job to make sure your child consumes all that food. The child will know
Yeah.
innately what to do.
Yeah.
That can really help. Your job is just to give them the opportunity and the space
Mm.
and the security to try the foods,
Yeah.
and trust that their instincts will kick in.
Yeah, amazing. And I think that that kind of links quite well to the democratic school
Mm.
approach, which is all about kind of providing a rich and stimulating environment for the children, but then trusting in their own curiosity and their own desire to learn.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's beautiful.
It's a really good way, I think, to think of feeding, because it does, people can feel really stressed about, how much has my child eaten today, or how
Mhm.
much food are they going to eat if they go to school or to nursery, and you don't have any control. And I think once you accept that you can't
Mhm.
physically force your child to eat food,
Yeah,
you step back and you think, I'll control my bit. I'll make
yeah,
sure they've got a nice space to eat, and I'll give them the opportunity to try different things. Children will eat when they're hungry, generally speaking.
yeah,
um, you know, if they're really, really hungry, they will eat.
yeah. I remember this moment that I found like slightly heartbreaking, but in a funny way, because my son was about 3, and I left him with someone, and when I picked him up, I asked him if he'd eaten anything, and he said, "Oh yeah, I'm really full. I had a rice cake and 2 raisins," and I was like, "What?" It's very sweet.
Oh,
Yeah,
for that day, that probably was fine.
yeah, maybe.
Sometimes if they're ill, if they're distracted, if they're just not feeling right, they might, or they're too hot. They just
Mhm.
they don't have an appetite on those days, and they go
Yeah.
through these like growth spurts that on those days they'll be really, really hungry. Once they've
Yeah.
had the peak of a growth spurt, then they drop back down, and so for those,
Okay.
they might not be that hungry at all. And
Yeah, it can be really noticeable when they're about to grow and suddenly they're eating like,
have
yeah, 3 times more than they normally would. Yeah, great. Do you have any other words of advice or anything else you'd like to share?
I think what I've taken from going from the theoretical to the practical in actually feeding a child, for myself, is that it's so easy to start to step into that worry of, are they eating enough, or I need to make sure that my child tries 100 different foods before they turn 1, which is
Mhm.
something I've seen a lot of.
Okay.
It's understandable, because you want to do what's best, and you want to make sure you do feel like it's a reflection on you, how they're eating, how well they're eating. um,
Mhm.
but I always come back to thinking about, well, what did my diet look like when I was a toddler compared to what it looks like now?
Yeah.
And they are worlds apart, because this amount of food that I had available as a toddler was very, very different to the kinds of foods that I eat now. So
Mhm.
you can't mess up your child's relationship with food by not feeding them enough different foods in the first 2 or 3 years of life.
Mhm.
They, as an adult, will come to learn and enjoy foods in a different way. And I think
Mhm.
just try and set the basics up for having a healthy emotional relationship with food. I think that's more important than giving them too much variety when they're
Mm.
younger.
Yeah, that sounds great. This anecdote came into my head when you were talking, which was I heard on the radio this couple that were living in France, and they'd gone to the doctor with their 6-month-old baby, and the doctor had said that they should start giving the baby Roquefort cheese, and they said, "Why is that? Is it because it's got health benefits?" And they said, "No, it's to get them used to the taste."
Yeah,
Which
exactly.
I don't know. I thought that was quite funny.
Well, there's something in that, in terms of like having really strong bitter flavors at the start of.
Okay, really?
Well, there's sort of a growing body of research that suggests it might be beneficial, because
Aha.
born with a preference for sweet tastes, and breast
Yeah.
milk is very sweet, and the kind of um the reasoning for it is that, generally speaking, sweet foods are more energy dense. And
Mm.
so prehistorically, caveman times, energy dense sweet foods are what you need to consume, whereas the bitter foods tend to have less energy, and they're not going to sustain you. They might
Mhm.
be poisonous. They're not necessarily the foods that we really want to
Yeah.
consume if we're trying to stay alive. doesn't really matter now because we know, things like kale or broccoli are not going to kill us.
Mm.
But we've still got this innate preference for sweet. So if you can introduce the more stronger bitter flavors early and give
Mm.
them time to practice, then they just get used to it a bit quicker, and it's less
Ah,
difficult when they're
yeah.
a toddler. If you introduce it when they're a toddler, it might be a little bit harder because they're
Okay.
just not used to it.
Yeah.
Uh, so
Oh, so the French doctor was right.
there's
This.
there's books actually about French diets, particularly around weaning babies, because
There's
there's
a book, did you say?
yeah, I can't
Oh,
remember
cool.
there's quite a few that look at the approach that is taken in France generally, because they
Oh, right.
have such a love of food, and food is treated,
Yeah.
as such a thing that brings people together, and it's very, very important and central to their
Mhm.
social structure around how you engage with family members, etc.
Mhm.
And actually the attitude of bringing baby up on the foods that they eat as a family and having those really strong tasting foods early
Mhm.
on um,
Yeah.
can be beneficial in avoiding fussy eating, and maybe sometimes
Yeah.
we can create our own problems by giving babies too bland or too sweet a food for when they're
Okay.
weaning.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing in France. I was in the Alps last summer and just noticing that there's much more of a culture of, going to the market and buying kind of fresh, locally grown produce. Like they don't seem to have been kind of overtaken by supermarkets in the way that we have
No,
here, which
I
is really
think
great.
as well in France, there's a lot of they grow a lot more food,
Yeah.
and so it's a bit more widely available. I guess they've got a little bit more space, and further south
Mm.
you go, they've got the climate to grow a lot
Mm.
more vegetables than generally we grow over here.
Mm.
So that might help as well, that they've just got more access to it.
Yeah.
But it's such a nice, I think it's a really nice relationship with food that you find in France generally.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, amazing. Well, I'll write a transcript of the interview. So all of the information that Katie has shared will be in the show notes and links to her projects as well. And yeah, thank you so much.
No worries. Thanks, Nina.
Thank you.